We're cooking brisket today. And before we go very far, let's just talk about brisket in general. First of all, it comes from the very front portion of the cow, right along the lower flank below the front legs. And this is called a packer brisket. It's the whole brisket. And so it's got two different parts on it. It's got one side, which is called the flat over here. And you'll see that it's humped over here, and that's called the point, or the decal is a more appropriate name for it. When you go to the store and you start to buy one of these, now this one is 19.5 pounds. Look right here and you'll see how thick that meat is right there. If you go back and look on the other side, you'll see almost a corresponding thickness. You want to see that. A lot of times you'll see them where it just tapers off from one side to the other, and that's not really a good thing. We're going to take it out of this cryovac packaging, which is kind of messy, and then we're going to trim it. I tend to buy just whole briskets and work with them from there. When you look at it, you'll see that there's a large piece of fat over here. That's really, really hard. We're going to cut that out. You can see all this fat along this side right here. And then plus you can see some where it was packed, some of this older meat along the side here. We're going to just kind of cut that part off. That we're going to just start right there, and we're going to kind of square our brisket. This hard fat right here, you're just going to cut it out. And we're going to come back to it and work a little bit more on that. On this section on the flat right here, we're just going to trim some of this up a little bit. One of the things you notice that there's a little silver skin on here. You want to try to get that off because the rub will not penetrate in those areas if you don't. So you won't get the bark that you want in those areas if you don't trim that portion of it. Now, if you notice anything about this brisket, you'll see one thing. The grain of the meat is running this way. That's going to be an important thing because we're going to want to cut against the grain later. We want to know that. Now we're going to try to work some of the decal loose here, just a little bit, getting rid of some of this hard fat that won't render itself very well, and it won't serve any useful purpose in our cook. Fat's not your enemy. It's kind of your friend, but there are certain kind of fats in this brisket that are tough. You can imagine this supports probably 60% of the cow. It's what he runs with, it's what he gets up with, what he walks with, what they do everything with. So these muscles are really strong and they got a lot of connective tissues in them. That's why you have to cook this particular cut low and slow. Since we're not necessarily trying to win a KBS contest today, we're going to leave this side just like it is, and we're going to turn it over, start working on the other side. Now here you see the entire fat cap that's on here. And once again, if you feel here, it's softer down in here. Right here, it's really, really hard. And we're going to pull some of that out. Now, a lot of people ask the question, do you cook it fat cap up or fat cap down? And it's a good question. I tend to cook it, for the most part, with it up. Sometimes I do cook it with it down. If there's not a lot of large flat cap, I'll cook it where the cap is down because it won't render through the meat. I'm not trying to make the meat taste fatty or anything, but fat adds an awful lot of flavor to the meat, and you're going to render it out anyways. Now, some people cut it so that you can separate the decal, and if you wanted to do that, you start pressing in right here in this fat portion right here. And this point, this section on the top here, will actually start to come loose if you do that. I just open that up so you can see how that goes through. And that's the decal on this side, and the flat is remaining on this side. Now, I'm going to leave it attached today. If you got 12 people over to eat, 15 people over to eat, some of them are going to want the lean cuts. That's down on this end. Some of them are going to enjoy the juicier, a little bit more fattier cuts, which is going to be up here on the decal side. If you were cooking in competition, you would separate it. You'd want to have those different cuts. So let's just say that we're happy now. And so this is Lisa's family steak rub right here. And all I'm gonna do is generally just sprinkle it all over. You wanna try to get these sides if at all possible. And you can see, generally, we've got a uniform piece of meat just coming straight up, straight up the chute here. So all we're trying to do is get those corners. I do add a little bit of pepper. This is like a 16 grain pepper right here. You want to coat it good because you want to get a good bark. So let's just talk about brisket. You know, it's a process. It's a long process. You start by trimming your brisket. You season your brisket. You're going to let it sit for about an hour. You have your grill set, and that's the nice thing about a Traeger or any pellet grill. You can set it to a particular temperature setting. And this is a Timberline 1300. That's their professional model. It's accurate within 5 degrees on temperature. Some people are cooking it hot and fast now. I still believe in slow and low. This brisket that I'm cooking today is 16 and a half hours to cook. And we did it with the temperature of about 220 degrees, except for the last hour we elevated it up to about 260. And our target temperature range today is 200 degrees. After about 3.5 hours of smoke, I started to take every hour and a half, and I would put a spritz on it. And that spritz was a demi-glace that we make and a beef broth that was a mixture. You could just glaze it and make sure that the meat didn't dry out. At about 10 hours, when the meat hit 165 degrees internal temperature, what I did was I pulled it off and I wrapped it in pink butcher paper. The good thing about this paper is it holds a lot of moisture in. And so a lot of those juices are still caught up in this paper, okay? We just hit the magic number of 200 on our brisket. 16 hours, 39 minutes, and 34 seconds. And what we're going to do now is we're going to rest the brisket for about an hour. The reason you do that, all the juices are going to be absorbed back into the brisket. I think we'll just kind of cover it up, which is going to help to keep it nice and moist. If you'll spend the time to do this, low and slow, go through the process that we've talked about, you're going to have a wonderful barbecue dinner for all your friends and family that's eating with you. Use Lisa's Family Steak Rub, and I guarantee you, it's just simply the best. Have a good time and get to cooking.